Greetings, my excellent friends, and welcome to Pro Photo Tips. My name is Josh Cripps. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Joshua Cripps Photography. This is part 2 of the walkthrough of how I created this photo from Gillespie's Beach in New Zealand. And in part 1 of the video, I talked you through how I set up this composition. It's a very simple one. And in this part of the video, I'm going to talk you through how I chose all the settings for my camera. And again, continuing that theme of simplicity, you'll see that the settings I chose follow some very simple rules. Let's jump on over to Lightroom. So this is not that exact photo, but it's a similar one, and I'm going to use it to begin to explain my settings, and then I'll show you that exact photo, and things will start to be a little more clear. So when I'm shooting landscapes, 99% of the time, I want my ISO to be as low as possible at its lowest base setting. That not only gives me the best dynamic range, but it also gives me the cleanest image with the least amount of noise. And on my camera, Nikon D810, the lowest base ISO is 64. So I have it set on that. Now, in the first video, I talked about why I chose a 14mm lens. That's basically to give you this super wide, expansive feel, like you can step right into the photo. Now, because my foreground object is quite close to me, and I still want everything sharp from these foreground rocks all the way out through the midground and off to the background, I know that I need a very deep depth of field. And I can get that by stopping my aperture down to something like f/16. Now, the wider you get with your lens, the more forgiving your depth of field and focus gets. And so I've shot with this 14mm lens a ton. I know that given where I'm at in relation to my foreground object and my background, that f/16 is going to give me a really, really good depth of field. Now, if you're not sure how to get complete depth of field for your composition, I do have a video on that, which you can check out right here, which is all about getting perfect focus and depth of field every time. In this case, f/16 worked for me fantastically. And one other reason that I chose f/16 as my aperture is I knew that I wanted to get this cool sunburst effect as the sun came out from underneath the clouds. And the more you stop down your aperture, not only does that give you a deeper depth of field, but it also creates that sunburst effect, which you can see is so beautiful right here and adds really that extra point of interest to the frame. Which left only one other setting. If you disregard white balance. I think I probably had it set to something like cloudy to help bring out the warm tones here in the sunset, the warm tones on the rock, but I knew I was probably going to make some adjustments to that white balance in post with my raw processor, so I wasn't overly concerned with the exact white balance I chose in the field. However, the shutter speed was of critical concern to me. So when you're shooting anything moving, that's when shutter speed is of fantastic concern. And basically, you have to decide, how do you want the motion in your photo to appear? Now, in this particular case, because the waves are so far away from me, 150 feet or so down the beach, they're going to take up a very small part of the overall image. And I know if I do a super long exposure, like a 2-second or a 5-second, you're going to get a little mushiness down here in the water, but the waves out here are going to be quite smooth, but overall the look is not going to be that different from the way that it looks at a faster shutter speed. And so I knew that I didn't necessarily need to go for a longer shutter speed. In fact, in my test shots like this one, I kind of liked the look of a faster shutter speed because it captured this spray coming off of the waves that caught this golden glow from the sunset. So I was actually thinking more, okay, I kind of want a faster shutter speed. So in terms of picking the right shutter speed for my exposure, I had a couple of things that I needed to think about. One was, do I want a good exposure for the entire scene overall, even though I know that choosing an exposure like that is going to make my sun be totally blown out right here because it's shining directly from underneath those clouds right into my camera? Or do I want to prioritize the exposure of the sun and let the rest of the scene go dark? Now, There's a couple of ways you can do this. If you're into exposure blending, then that's kind of a moot point. You can take one exposure for the overall scene and one exposure for the dark sun. But if that's too much work or you don't want to do that for whatever reason, my recommendation is to expose for the highlights and then recover the shadows, especially if you have a camera that has a good dynamic range, like I shoot with a Nikon D810, has a fantastic dynamic range. So I knew that by looking at my histogram in the field that this photo was blown out here in the highlights. But if I were to take another photo, maybe 2 stops down from this, here we go, at a 60th of a second, that would be able to capture all but the most extreme bright highlights of the sun. And even though my photo looks very, very dark, by looking at the histogram, I can tell that the bulk of the image data was not actually black, which means I knew I could recover those details in post. And so this is the exposure that I opted for. And in fact, this is the final exposure of the image that I've been showing you so far in this tutorial. So this raw file turns into this final image with some tweaks in Lightroom. So that's how I chose my shutter speed. I basically just wanted to prevent my sun from blowing out, and I knew that I'd be able to recover these shadows in post. So again, you can see I chose my settings for some really simple reasons. I knew that I wanted to emphasize depth of field and have good focus through the frame. I wanted to create this sunburst effect. I wanted to capture a relatively fast shutter speed on the waves to catch that glow. And I wanted to not blow out the sun, knowing that I could recover my shadows here in post. So the next step was to bring the photo into the digital darkroom and edit it to create the final image, which you see here. So be sure to check out part 3 of the video where I show you exactly how I do that. As always, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you're curious to get more free photo tips, gear reviews, more inspiring photos, you can jump on the free weekly Pro Photo Tips newsletter. And if you're interested in more in-depth photography and processing tutorials like this, you can check out the Nature Photography Academy. Until next time, have fun and happy shooting.